Welcome to Words Do Things, a podcast about the powers and limits of language. I'm Dr. Sørina Higgins, and I'm interested in the ways words make things happen. Join me as my guests and I explore language that is helpful, harmful, magical, or masterful, and learn how to wield words beautifully yourself.
Hello and happy Sunday to you, or whatever day it is when you are listening to this. I have another rerun for you today of an interview that I first aired on Halloween in 2022. This is with Reverend Brad Schmidt, and I've already recorded a new episode with him in October 2025, so please come back and listen to that one in due course. I look forward to hearing what you have to say about this interview. Note that these old reruns are audio only, but the new ones will have video as well. Enjoy!
Welcome to 1619 and 1776, a podcast exploring the common ground between American Christians on the left and the right. In each episode, I listen to pastors, priests, ministers, and preachers talk about what they see as the core of our faith, what the last few years have been like for them, and how we can come together in unity throughout the church today. Join me while we build bridges across the chasms that divide us.
Church planter from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He received his undergraduate degree from Florida State University and then attended the Reformed Theological Seminary. He is currently pastor of the City Church of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which is a historically rooted and spiritually diverse Christian community. The mission of the church is to present the Christian faith as plausible, relevant, and increasingly valuable in people's lives. He is married and has 2 children.
Welcome, Brad, to the 1619 and 1776 podcast. I'm very glad to have you here today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, why don't we begin with just you introducing yourself a little bit to our listeners, a little bit about yourself, your faith, and your congregation.
Sure. Yeah, Brad Schmidt. I'm in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, so I'm born and raised here. And pastor and church planner. I started a church called City Church with a friend of mine, and we've been going since 2006. So we're past the 15-year mark here in South Florida. We are in a context that's pretty hard to do church. Churches don't seem to thrive down here in South Florida very well. So we're east of I-95 in Broward County, and there hasn't been one church that's been started and has been sustainable over the past decade here in this region. So that's part of the why we exist, to try to just create new financial sustainability models for churches, new missional sustainability models for churches. And yeah, that's a little bit of our context. And yeah, we love Fort Lauderdale. We love the people of Fort Lauderdale. And we're trying our best to form a spiritual community here that helps the community flourish.
Yeah. What do you think it is that's enabled you to stay and grow there over 15 years when others have found it difficult?
I think personally, for me, what has sustained me as a minister has been friendship. I haven't felt alone as a pastor, which I think is unique. I think there's a lot of stories of isolation in pastoral ministry, especially in church planning in the early years when it's really difficult and really hard. It's very easy to feel alone. Personally, have never felt that. I've always done church planting with friends, and I think that's been a huge help to me and by extension to our church.
That's really wonderful to hear. I'm glad you've had that encouragement. Now, as a pastor, you probably get asked questions a lot of times about, well, what is special about Christianity? What makes it unique? How is it different from other religions? So I always ask my guests, what would you say is the heart or the core of Christianity?
Sure. I think when I'm asked that, I think of 2 things. And the first is probably this word renewal. I think Christianity is about renewal, the renewal of all things. It's the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. And I think that's how the story starts and that's how the story ends in the scriptures. And I think that is unique. I think, the Bible says that this world matters, that matter matters, and that people matters, our bodies matter, that resurrection is physical, not just spiritual, and that God is going to take every sad thing in this world and he's going to reverse it. He's going to make it untrue in the end, and he's going to renew all things. And I think that's probably the first thing I would say is the heart of the gospel is that word renewal. But I think you always have to combine it with this other word. I like to use grace, which you find in the scriptures often, this idea that there is a God who is deeply personal. He's not just cosmic. He's personal. He knows everything about us and the faults, the frailty, the brokenness, the fragmented places, and his response to all of it is to move towards us, to pursue union with us. And I believe that's the heart of the gospel, the Christian gospel, a God of grace who at infinite cost to himself pursues union with broken, flawed human beings.
Oh, that's really beautiful. That's a really lovely way to say it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I've been doing this series and I've been talking to different pastors, they all seem to agree on those fundamental truths that you've just expressed about renewal and grace and the kingdom of God. And yet, you don't have to look around very far to see Christians fighting with each other pretty bitterly over some particular issues. Where have you seen those divisions? What have you observed either broadly in American Christianity or even right at home in your own congregation? What do people tend to split over?
Well, I mean, the obvious, right? And the obvious to me is just identity politics. I mean, you've got the whole nation being discipled by the 24-hour news cycle, Christians and non-Christians alike. And I think that brings the divisions into the church. So you've got, right-wing church and you've got left-wing church. And I think, all of the issues that align with the left, all the issues that align with the right, we could probably walk through those, but I think those are unsurprising, And I think the division is unsurprising because the world is being discipled by Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow, by these sources. And I think that should inform the job of the church, right? The job of the church is to form people around King Jesus. And let's just say that's hard. That's challenging in American culture that is so radically divided around identity politics.
That's very succinct. Thank you. Where would you say you and your church fall on that left and right, or is there a different way you prefer to come at that question?
I would say, there are many, many problems with our church. My particular church, we have lots of flaws, lots of blind spots. But I would say one of the things I'm probably most proud of is just the cultural, political diversity that exists within our church. I think you can find people on the right, you can find people on the left in our church. And I think that's by design, that we're trying to do that on purpose. We want to be a place for people all along the spiritual spectrum, right? So people who don't believe or don't yet believe or do affirm classic historic Christian doctrine, and everybody in between. And we also want to be a place for people on the right, people on the left, and everybody in between. So I think we're kind of all over the map, honestly. We're in Broward County, which is a very blue county, but we're also in a kind of historical, theologically conservative faith tradition, which means, we do have people on the right as well, culturally and politically. So it's, there's mission, there's our tradition, intention, and I think that's a real sweet spot for our church. Yeah,
that is something that a lot of churches aspire to. So maybe in a little while, I might ask you for any practical specifics of how churches might emulate that. But before we get to that, so given the diversity of your church, then, what have the last couple of years been like for you? What were the early days of COVID like for you? And do you want to share any challenges that you faced through that time?
Sure. I think we experienced a lot of what every church in America was experiencing during the pandemic, which was people freaking out, right? People unsure of what was happening, of what voices to listen to. We saw some of the polarization come out in that time. Like I said before, we do have a relatively kind of a safe place for people to be all along the spectrum, but trying times kind of bring the polarization out, right? Because people are stressed out. People are grabbing onto whatever information they can find. So yeah, we definitely dealt with some conflict related to the vaccines, the masking or not masking, things like that were definitely on the forefront for us. And then you had, the Black Lives Matter movement kind of take off during the pandemic. And I would say that was a thread, we dealt with as a church as well. Probably not as acutely as I know other congregations kind of wrestled and fought over those things. I don't think we necessarily, it was very acute for us, but it was definitely there.
Okay. Is your church ethnically diverse?
Not to the degree we aspire to be or want to be, but we're endeavoring towards that more and more. Just starting a Spanish-speaking group within our church, trying to raise up leaders from that context. But South Florida is relatively diverse down here. But I would say that's been a blind spot of our congregation over the years, and something we're endeavoring more and more to pursue, because I think that's a part of what it means to be a picture of the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, right? I mean, the kingdom of God is a diverse place. And as a pastor, I'm always looking for more opportunities to promote diversity. But I would say that's just always been a challenge.
Well, it's a really big challenge, right? Because tend to have geographical reasons that people group together by ethnicity, Correct. Depending on where people have settled, depending on the history of redlining, et cetera. But then also, we like to go to a church that reflects our cultural heritage, right? So we like
Correct.
to be in a church where leadership looks like us and speak like us, and it's our kind of music. And when there's events, it's our kind of food. So how do you deal with those challenges if you're trying to build a multi-ethnic church community?
Well, I think from the front in our worship service, trying to promote diversity as much as possible is critically important. And like I said, something we're endeavoring to do more and more. Praying for it has been one thing. I also think just like being, if our church defaults, towards white, I think it's important to say out loud what the blind spots are, right? Because every cultural church has blind spots, right? So, whether it's the Black church or the Asian church, or if it's a white church, there are blind spots. And I actually think the white church has the greatest blind spots, because in a being majority culture means that you're probably the least likely to discover your blind spots in that culture. And so as a church, we talk about that. We say that out loud. We say where it's hard for us and where we're trying. And I think that's a part of it, just saying it out loud, being honest, being transparent, and pursuing unity together authentically.
That sounds like a really healthy approach to me, because I'm used to hearing one of two extremes. I'm used to hearing on the one hand, well, you're just attacking my whiteness and it's reverse racism against whiteness. And so there's a lot of anger and defensiveness and fear on the part of majority churches or individuals or groups, right? And on the other hand, there tends to be the endeavor to call that out, the endeavor to call out the reliance on whiteness or the use of it as a cultural domination. And so a lot of times the two don't talk to each other and don't listen to each other.
Correct.
So
Correct.
It sounds like an approach of saying, okay, we acknowledge that we're the majority culture and that therefore we have these blind spots. That sounds like a healthy way to begin to me.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm just trying out here, I am not someone who has figured this out, but I would just think that's kind of obvious. I mean, wouldn't the majority culture be the least likely to uncover their blind spots in whatever place you're in where the majority culture is? I mean, that's just common sense to me. That seems probable, right? So I also think there's just always this critique there's a critique of power in the scriptures, right? It doesn't say power is wrong, but it's always it always seems to be needing to be checked, right? And there's always this default embrace, it appears to me in the scriptures, of the weak, right? And whether it's the story of redemption, which comes not from the strong, but from the weak, not from the older brother, but from the younger brother, right? It's not, it's Abel, not Cain, right? It's Jacob, not Esau, it's Isaac, not Ishmael. It's always this great reversal. And when I read Jesus, I see this default response to the weak and to the minority. And I really believe that should inform the default impulse of Christians in today's culture.
I love how you've just laid out a theological foundation, but also showed us how it should apply. So maybe this would be a good time. Do you have any? Yeah, go ahead. I was thinking practical suggestions for how churches can go about those things.
I don't know. There's a just to kind of sum it up for me. There was a quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he said something to the effect of, Christians should take a stronger stand in favor of the weak rather than considering the first possible right of the strong. And that's always meant something to me. And I think what he's getting at is this default impulse we have, right? So when you see a shooting, and there's a black body on the ground, right? What is the default response to that? I think that's really interesting to me. Where do we favor? Who are we concerned about? And I think we saw that play out. Right? I mean, time and time again.
Do we try to jump to justifying it? And do we jump to justifying the use of power? Or do we jump to sympathy with the weak? You're right. It tends to break down on those lines.
It does. And Bonhoeffer said it's really binary, right? Either you're gonna stand in favor of the weak, or you're going to consider first the possible right of the strong. And I'm kind of with Bonhoeffer. I think Christians should take a stronger stand in favor of the weak. And I think where Bonhoeffer got that and where we get it is from
I'm reading Shai Lin's excellent book, The New Reformation. I don't know if you've come across that book yet. It's pretty new.
I haven't.
I highly recommend it, at least as far as I've gotten. And he talks about exactly that. He talks about seeing the divergent community responses to the police shooting of especially young black men. And he talks about sort of sitting in the middle and listening out of one side to his own black friends bewailing and bemoaning this, and seeing the patterns of abuse and seeing the ways that authority is misusing its power. And then on the other side, he sees his white friends saying, well, he must have been doing something to get in trouble, and he must have responded badly, or must have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or probably had a criminal record. And so he brings us right down to a fine point of exactly what you're talking about. Okay, so here's a question for you then. You first.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I have an acquaintance who is an associate pastor right at the height of the most recent round of Black Lives Matter protests and responses and so forth. He put up a long social media post that ended with saying, although I don't know anything about it and haven't researched it, I am sure that every one of these police shootings of black men was justified. How do you think a Christian pastor reading the same Bible that you're reading, and actually in the same denomination as yourself, holding all the same creeds and doctrines and confessions, how does he come to exactly the opposite conclusion that you are coming to?
I think you got me. Honestly, I'm speechless. Yeah,
that's what I'm wrestling with. How can people share the same foundations but come to such opposite applications?
I keep going back to Bonhoeffer, and I think the key word he said was consider first. It's not that we don't think about the possible rights of the strong, right? It's not that those are not considerations, but I just think there is this default response that is super interesting. And I think that shows a lot about where our hearts align. And I'm just of the persuasion that God's heart defaults to the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed, the brokenhearted. And And I can't back off of that. So when I hear what you just laid out, I don't really have a category for it. I'm not sure where that came from. I would imagine, like we were talking about, the whole world is being discipled by somebody.
Yeah.
I just don't know where. I don't know where that discipleship is coming. I literally don't have a category for it.
Would that be a question that if you were to sit down in a room with this young man, this young associate pastor
Absolutely.
I'm talking about, would you ask him, who are the voices that you're listening to? Where did you get these ideas?
I would just say, I would try not to do it in an accusatory manner, but I might just say, tell me how you got here. Part of the reason why I love this podcast you're doing is it's from a position of curiosity, right?
Right.
Help me understand how you got here, because we both had the same tradition. We're both reading the same Bible. How did we get here? That'd probably be my question. And maybe we'd be, enlightened to some things that I haven't been aware of. There might be some newfound perspectives I would gain. I would doubt it would take me from the place where I'm landing, but I'd be happy to go down that road of just curiosity and learning from that man's perspective, because it's very interesting to me.
That's a nice neutral word, interesting. Is it also disturbing or challenging or unsettling to you?
It's all of that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, it's interesting because for the way you framed the question was like, how did somebody who went, got the same theological education, reading the same Bible, like that on its face is very, very interesting, right?
Right.
The conclusion he came to that you read to me was, that disturbs me. I'm bothered by that.
Yeah. But you'd still be willing to sit down and listen and let this hypothetical person talk for a while and take you through their logic of how they got to that.
I think so. Yeah, I think I would. And you know why? Because honestly, if I don't start off that way, then I'm just picking a fight. Right. Like, when Jesus talked about truth and love, they go together. Right. And if you really do care about truth, then you do have to think through, I think, how that truth is being delivered. How are you coming at someone? What tone, what timing, what manner are you approaching someone? Otherwise, you don't really care about the truth. No, I actually care about the truth. Right? Mm-hmm. So if I actually care about the truth, I have to give that person the least amount of possibilities of being defensive, which I know is in my heart as well, right? Because that's the human condition, is we are defensive when people come at us. So that's why I think I would start with, how did we get here? Yeah. as opposed to, you're very offensive to me, and what you said is very disturbing to me. That's
this approach that you're describing is, this approach that you're describing is so different than the usual media or social media response, because the usual response is to attack and to fight. But I think I hear you saying, package the truth in a palatable way so that people will pause and listen to it. Is that what I hear you saying?
Well, I'm not saying, here's what I'm not saying, that there are times and places when people have to get mad and flip tables. Okay, I'm not saying there's not a category for that, but you picked up on something, which is, we're lobbing bombs at each other left and right. We're on social media, on Twitter. I mean, we are treating each other very harshly, right? And if we think something is offensive, we go at someone. And, I just like to ask the question sometimes, how's that going for us? And so, I think in a culture that is so used to lobbing bombs at each other, we could all do well to engage more curiosity, more humility, less audacity with each other, and see if that gets us a little closer to one another. Here's the thing: we're all made of the same stuff.
Right. Yep.
So why don't we?
Made in the image of the same God.
We're all made of the same stuff. So why don't we act like it? Why don't we engage? Why do we talk to each other as if we're not made of the same stuff?
Yeah. So can you think of a specific instance, a particular conversation you've had in which you've been able to use this disarming method when someone came at you with all their rhetorical guns blazing and you were able to sort of calm that down and hear where they were coming from?
Sure. Yeah. I remember, a couple different coffee and lunches that I had when things were especially charged up and having those conversations where people were maybe concerned about my positions or why I hadn't, spoken up on this particular issue or that particular issue loudly enough. I mean, I had those and, I sit down with them and I kind of just let them talk and I ask questions, like clarifying questions. And sometimes it sounds like, hey, tell me how I come off to you. Like, do you think I'm of this particular persuasion, or you seem really convinced that I vote this particular way? Like, how did you get there? And then I typically wait a little bit and then I say something that I know would surprise them, a perspective I do have that might disarm them. And let them know that, listen, this was really unwarranted. There's no reason to be charged up like this. Because here's the thing, I'm not a very charged up person when it comes to this stuff. I am not getting all riled up. So if somebody, kind of my approach, honestly, if somebody cranks it up to 11, I just keep it at a 5. That's
hard to do.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. Maybe that's more of my personality type than it is the gospel working in my life. I don't know. I don't know where those lines are sometimes, but I have found it to be helpful for me because, I mean, internally, sometimes I'm looking at people going, I can't believe you believe these things. Right. I can't believe you believe these things in such a way that it has turned you into someone who is unrecognizable to me. Like that, I do have those thoughts, right? But I think externally, I just keep it at a 5.
Okay, that sounds like a really good strategy. Sounds like something to recommend.
I don't know how they're walking away, if they think, I'm full of it or not, or if they're put off by that approach. But
maybe we'll find out. Maybe they'll tweet at us after this podcast.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe they'll reference a certain lunch I had with them. We'll see.
I wanted to go back because I've noticed a really interesting word that you've used several times already. And so I wondered if you would unpack it for us. You've used the word disciple in some really interesting contexts. You've said we're all being discipled by somebody, whether it's Fox News or CNN or the books we're reading or whatever. That's a religiously charged word, isn't it? Being discipled by. Do you think that we are making alternative religions out of these ideologies that we follow?
Oh, absolutely. Keep in mind, I think it was Nancy Pearcey who said human beings are inherently religious, that if they don't worship God, they worship, a God substitute, right? So everybody's religious. Everybody builds their identity around something or someone. If it's not God, it's something else, right? So I think when I use the word disciple in those terms, it's like using religion in those terms, which is everybody is building their identity on something. And what I've noticed is people are building an identity around politics. And the reason they've built an identity around politics is because they demonize other people. They think they're in and others are out. I mean, they are suspicious of other people. I mean, these are what religious identities do. If you build your identity on anything but the grace of God in your life, if you build it on I am this or I am that or I've done this or I've done that, it turns you into a little bit of a monster. It does that in my life, right? When I build my identity apart from God. And I think when you build your identity around politics, it begins to spiral downward, right, into demonization. And obviously we've seen oppression around politics. So those are some of the things I'm playing with when I talk about discipleship.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So in addition to approaching somebody, asking them to explain their position, keeping calm, even if they get hot under the collar, do you have any other practical suggestions for how we can try to build unity with people who have these competing identities against one another.
Yeah, I think to a certain degree, this next thing I'm going to say is helpful in that regard, especially when it comes to like denominations, right? Mm-hmm. I think it can apply to different political groups, but I like to think about, for me, going to the mountains. So here's my metaphor. Like, I'm a beach guy. Like, I'm from South Florida. I'm a beach bum. Okay. I love going to the beach. I very rarely go to the mountains, but here's the thing. When I do, like this summer, I was in North Carolina, I was in the mountains, and I will say this, there's a part of my soul that needs the mountains. And when I'm looking at the mountains, I'm thinking, I'm so glad I'm here. I need this. But something happens, usually a couple days go by or a week goes by, and I'm ready to go home. Vacation's over. And where am I going home to? I'm going back to the beach because that's where I live. That doesn't mean I don't need the mountains. It's just not where I live. And I think Christians can have a posture with other Christians that are different than them, that have different theological persuasions or denominational persuasions, and maybe even political persuasions than them. And I think you can have a posture that says, you're seeing something about the world or you're seeing something about God that is unique and different than how I see things. And there's something I'm curious about, right? So for instance, I'm a Presbyterian minister, right? I'm a Presbyterian by choice. But when I go to a Pentecostal church or I'm in a Pentecostal gathering and I'm seeing the way they worship, which is different than me, the best version of myself says, wow, my soul needs this. You are tapping into something about the Spirit of God, something about worship that is different than I'm used to, and my soul needs it. Now, I'm not Pentecostal. My home, I'm a Presbyterian. That's home for me. But that doesn't mean my soul doesn't need it. And so I think moving from demonization to appreciation is a big part of it. It doesn't mean you have to change. It doesn't mean I need to change. It doesn't mean I'm not in the right place. I'm not in the right home. But can we all have a little bit of humility to say there are parts of God, there are parts of the world, parts of humanity that we miss and that other people see more clearly than we do. And if that's the case, I think that opens the door.
That reminds me of a similar principle in academia. I know about it through Diana Gleyer's use of the phrase intellectual hospitality, which is the idea of invite other concepts, other ideas, other worldviews, other philosophies into your home for a dinner. Now, you're not inviting them to come there and live. You're not marrying them. You're not adopting them. You're inviting them over for dinner. And when you have guests over for dinner, you're going to try to be polite and listen to what they have to say. Ask them questions and nod in agreement, or at least say, I'm listening now and again. And it's only the very rare occasion that your dinner party turns into a fight. That would be extremely unfortunate. But you invite these ideas in. You listen to Nietzsche. You listen to Marx. You listen to Kendi. You listen to Soul. And then at the end of the day, you can show them the door. But you've been hospitable and kind to these ideas, and you've given them a fair hearing. Is that kind of similar to what you're saying?
I think that's beautiful. Yeah, I like the word you used or that you've referenced, intellectual hospitality. I've always thought of it as intellectual humility, right? Which is admitting the fact that I don't know everything and I don't see everything. But I think hospitality is a great way to talk about it. That was really moving. That's a very beautiful way to think about it.
I've found it impressive and challenging myself, that idea. Okay, but do you draw the line? Are there some places in your metaphor that you would never visit because they wouldn't be safe for you or others? Or are there people I should not have over to my home because they would not be safe for me or for others? Do we draw the line at this humble and invitational approach somewhere?
Sure. Yeah, I think the line is different for every person. You know, some people because of their background or their history, or maybe especially if they've experienced abuse or oppression. I mean, you can't be hospitable, you know, to certain ideas or go to certain places. So I think that's different. I think everybody has a line. I think everybody has a line, but I don't think that negates the overall principle of hospitality. And I like the way you actually extended the metaphor. There are some people I don't have in my home, right? Like I don't invite somebody into my home that I know is going to argue with me all the time. and make my dinner party miserable. If I know that in advance, one rule of coming into my house, you have to not hate me. Nobody in my house, who hates me. Like call it a family rule. I think we all kind of have those. And I like the way you actually extended that metaphor.
Right. And you wouldn't have someone in your home who's going to threaten your wife or your kids or
100%.
possessions, et cetera. Yeah. But here's the problem though, Brad.
Yeah.
People are drawing those lines in such wildly different places. I mean, the guests that I have had, some of them have drawn those lines against each other and have said, you are not a Christian because of your rhetoric, and therefore I will not engage with you. Or you are not even a person who is worth talking to because of your rhetoric, and therefore I will not engage with you. So how do we have this intellectual hospitality when people are categorizing each other as abusers or unsafe for exactly opposite reasons and for the words that each other are using?
That's a great question. I mean, it's kind of like having the angry neighbor, right? Across the fence, the neighbor who says, "Get off my lawn." I mean, we have neighbors like that, right? I'm not sure what to do with them. I do not have a good answer to that, because if we're not acting in good faith together, we can't really go anywhere together. I mean, good faith is such a critical part of unity, isn't it? Believing the best about each other, the benefit of the doubt. And if that's not there, I'm not sure how unity happens in those situations.
So are you optimistic for the future of the church in America, or are you pessimistic?
I mean, I'm real bullish on the church, right? America, I think I have a much more complex kind of relationship to, but the church part, I think the church is going to flourish. I think the church is going to grow. I think the church of Jesus Christ is not going to be stopped. And I think all of the divisions we're seeing in the world are not going to thwart the progress of the church. I'm very optimistic, very bullish on the church. Kingdoms rise and fall, though, don't they? I mean, any student of history will say, you don't put if you put all of your eggs in the basket of an empire or a kingdom, it's the wrong place to put it. Yeah. So part of that informs, I think, a healthy detachment, right? With an empire or with a place. It doesn't mean we don't engage it. Doesn't mean we don't root for its flourishing and its wholeness. But at the end of the day, our hope is not in America. Our hope is in Jesus and the church he's building. And those are two separate things. I know they overlap in a number of places, but they're not the same thing. And I think part of what we've talked about today in this time is what happens when we see those things conflated. Right. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be when those things get conflated. And yes, that's probably how I would parse out the future of the church. Yeah, very bullish on the church. America, I mean, who knows what's going to happen?
Well, thank you. I think that's a really good summary place to stop, unless you feel that we've skipped something you really wanted to say. Was there any other point you really wanted to make, or something we didn't cover?
No, I don't think so. Again, I really appreciate you. I appreciate this podcast and its aim to be curious and ask questions like this. I think this is part of the solution.
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed talking with you today, and I think my listeners will enjoy what you've had to share.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of 1619 and 1776. If you liked it, please subscribe, leave a review on your favorite podcast app, and pass it along to a friend. This show was artfully produced by Christopher Bartlett. Music was arranged and performed by Chuck Jennings. I'm Sørina Higgins, and I hope you join me next time for another perspective on unity across partisan divides in the church today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Words Do Things. I hope you come back next week for more ideas and discussion. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, like, share, and review. If you have suggestions, you can find me on social media. I'm Dr. Sørina Higgins on most platforms. Thanks to my project coordinator, Sophia Holcomb, to the anonymous musician who provided me with 2 arrangements of Talk Don't Bother Me by Ray Charles, to all my guests and to each of you for joining the conversation. Whatever you say today, remember, words do things. What do you want them to do?